Hi, hello everyone. Good to see you all again. Today we are going to speak about the topic of calculation in chess. Now, rather than giving you specific tips about how to calculate very long variations in chess, which is in itself another topic or another issue, I would like to discuss efficient calculation. And what do I mean by this? So basically, it's very easy when you look at a certain position, and this is what I see many people do many times, is just right away start calculating variations until you find something or you don't find something without any particular order. Now, this might not be very clever because, first of all, not every chess position is a tactical position where you have tactical opportunities, and second of all, when you do this without any particular order, you might waste a lot of time on irrelevant things. So basically, I would like to show here two examples to illustrate my point. So this is the first position from a game of relatively not very known players, but quite high rated, about 2400, and it's white to move. And now what I want you to do is to try to stop the video, but not calculating too much variations, but simply thinking about potential tactical problems that black might face and how can you potentially exploit them. So with this I mean hanging pieces that you can try to win, or pieces that have potential to be double attacked or skewered. So this is your task. So I hope you did it, you came up with some ideas. So let's see what kind of tactical problems that black has that we might try as white to take advantage of. So one thing that we can see is, for example, the rook lining up on the open d file, and we have two enemy bishops lining up on the same file. Maybe we will have some skewer on the d file. This is one idea to consider. Second thing, we might see that the knight on g6 is slightly hanging because the bishop is pinning the pawn on f7, and this means that if the pawn on e4 disappears somehow, then the move queen takes g6 actually wins the knight. This is another thing to consider. Now, what other ideas can we consider? Maybe somehow to push the pawn to f4 and to have a fork against these two pieces, which have a potential of being forked. That's another idea. Maybe we can somehow try to make the move knight b5 work, some double attack. And I think there are even more tactical ideas in these positions because the black pieces are slightly bit hanging. But these are the ones that at least came to my mind, and maybe you guys have even more suggestions. But basically, okay, we have 3, 4, 5 ideas, candidate ideas. Which one of them should we calculate first? So, first of all, by order of calculation, we should always start with the most forcing moves. So basically this means checks, or captures, or attacks, attacking an enemy piece. So, for example, thinking about how to push my pawn to f4 and then to play e5 is a secondary option because it's not forcing. So the first thing that I have to calculate as white is forcing moves. So we have only one check here to consider, which is bishop takes f7. We see that it don't get white too much. We can eliminate it very quickly. Now what about captures? Well, we have this capture on f7, which as we know is not very relevant. We have bishop takes h6, which is once again not achieving too much. Of course, there are a couple of maybe knight takes c6 is also a capture, but I think it's not even worth considering. And then we get to attacks. So what moves can white make here in order to attack an enemy piece? There are quite a lot actually. But let's try to consider some of them. So one of our options was knight to b5. We see that black can just take on d5. The bishop is protecting the queen. Not too much to see from here. Now what about playing a move like e5? Looks interesting because, as we remember, one of our potential ideas was to try and capture this knight on g6. And the move e5 is actually very forcing because black only have one option here, which is to take the pawn on e5 with the knight, because if the bishop takes, now as we know we can execute our idea and take on g6. So let's try to calculate e5. Black will have to take with the knight. And because black has only one option and the move is completely forced, it is worth considering to try and calculate this move even further, to see the second move. Because when the opponent only has one option, it actually makes it much more easy for us to calculate than scenarios when we make a move and the opponent maybe have 3 or 4 different options, right? So black has to take with the knight. And then we see we must go with the same approach of attacks, rather checks, captures and attacks on the second move also. So after knight takes e5, we don't have any new checks in the position besides maybe queen h7, which is completely irrelevant. We don't have any new captures, but we do have one new attack, which is the move f4. And we see suddenly that after f4, the knight is trapped because it cannot go to g4, can't go to c4. And the very important factor here that if black plays knight g6, which looks fairly safe, we know from earlier stage that the knight is not safe on g6 because now the queen can just capture it, and white is actually winning here completely. So basically the move e5 is just winning, but I think it's very easy to miss such a move because it's very easy to get lost in all kinds of secondary options. So for example, you see that once the move e5 works, white does not need even for 1 second to consider any kind of ideas to push the pawn on f4. You don't need to consider any kind of moves like rook d2 and rook d1 trying to skewer on the d file, because these are secondary options which are non-forcing. If the forcing option works, you don't have any reason to calculate any more variations. So if white thinks here efficiently, he might find the move e5 quite quickly, and then he might not even need to spend so much time, because in itself the move e5 followed by f4 is not that difficult. It's just a bit tricky to see because white has many options. But once you kind of ward off the options which are non-forcing, you will come to the move e5 quite quickly. So I hope you enjoyed this example. Now let's take a look at another one. So the second example is actually, this is the position. It's actually from a game that I've played. It was a rapid game though. You might take a look at the position. It's move number 21. It is white to move. And I played against strong international master. And actually in this position, white already has quite a dominant position. If you see, he already has an extra pawn. We can see that the black king is in the center of the board, not very safe. White has quite active pieces. His rook is nice on d6. But when I reached this position in the game, I really felt like white must have some tactical opportunities. And this is because of a couple of reasons. First of all, we see that the rook on e1 is kind of x-raying the black's king. So we might have some ideas to make some discovered attacks there. Second thing is that the bishop on d7 is slightly loose. We see that it's only protected by the king. If somehow white can make the king move away, maybe we'll be able to capture the black bishop. And basically the third reason why it's very likely that white will have a tactic here is because black is very much undeveloped. His rooks are still in their corners, and this is really the moment of truth for white, because if he does not react very quickly here, black might be able to consolidate his position, put a rook on d8, protect the bishop on d7, perhaps even bringing the other rook to the center, and he might be not in such a bad position. But here I was starting to think about some potential ideas. Once again, we don't calculate yet, we just think about potential ideas here for white. So let me take off these ones. So once again, you might want to stop the video and think about some potential ideas here for white. So let's see. First idea that came to mind is somehow to sacrifice the knight on d5. It will practically force the black pawn to take on d5, and then to make some discovered check with the bishop, using the fact once again that the rook is lining up against the king. This is one potential idea. Second idea which comes to mind is to move the bishop somewhere. There are a couple of options, but just a general idea to move the bishop and then to jump with the knight on d5 when the pawn on e6 is pinned, and try to do something with this check. Third idea which comes to mind is trying to maneuver this knight to a better square, maybe b6. Looks like a nice square with some kind of a double attack against the bishop and the rook. And these are practically all of the ideas that came to my mind during the game. If you had some more ideas, maybe there are even more ideas here. Those are the ones that at least I see clearly. Now, which one of those should we consider first? Once again, the most forcing one. So for example, the move knight a4 is a non-forcing move because it's not a check and it's not a capture. Black have many ways to react. This is why I will leave this move to the end of the calculation. Only if no other move, a forcing move, will work properly, then I will maybe consider the move knight a4. The two other moves are more forcing. So practically the most forcing move here is knight d5, definitely. This is the first move which needs to be calculated. We see that black only has one option here, to take on d5, because if the black king moves away, the knight will make many troubles in the black's position. He has to take the knight. And now we have all kinds of possibilities to make a discovered check with the bishop. Problem is that there are no pieces that the bishop can capture, and there seems to be no apparently such a good discovered check with the bishop. I know it's very unfortunate, but the move knight d5 doesn't work. So if the move knight d5 doesn't work, what should be our second option here, the most forcing option? Once again, we only had forcing options here. Of course, there are many captures and checks here. Rook takes d7 is a capture, rook takes c6, but a good player also needs to have the ability to ward off some irrelevant options rather quickly. None of these captures really achieves anything. This is why I don't see even a point to consider them. But what about threats? What kind of threats can white create here? And once again, I'm going back to the idea to move the bishop from e3 and to kind of prepare the move knight d5. So the bishop has couple of legal moves. We have bishop d4, we have bishop d2, f4, g5, h6. Many possible options. So which one of those should we consider first? Which one of those is the most forcing one? Well, out of all of these moves, the only moves which creates a threat with the bishop is the move bishop h6. It looks silly, putting the bishop on a square which can be captured, but it does create a threat of bishop takes g7. Also, we know that once the bishop moves, the threat of knight d5 is becoming very serious. So let's try to calculate together what will happen here. So black will most probably take on h6, white will play knight d5 check, and the black king will have to move, obviously. If the black king moves to d8, then the knight will come to b6. It's just a simple double attack against the rook and against the bishop. We will see it very soon on the board. If the black king moves to e8, then we have knight takes f6 check, winning back the bishop on d7. White will be in a completely winning position because he not only got back his material but also collected some pawns. So after, once again, pawn takes bishop, knight d5 check. If the king moves to f7, then we have just rook takes bishop with a check. Looks very promising. And if black takes on h6 and then plays king f8, then we can play knight b6, hitting the rook and the bishop. And black is forced to give back some material. So for example, rook d8, knight takes bishop with a check, king f7. And we see that white restored his material advantage. Now he still has a pawn up, but we see that the pawn on e6 is badly hanging. White can just collect it. And not only that white has two pawns up in this position, it's very likely that it will also might be able to collect some more pawns on f6. He might even not take on e6 and just be happy with the fact, that the knight, that the pawn structure of blacks was very badly shattered. So we can conclude that the move bishop h6 is definitely working. It's definitely not losing, and it's making black a lot of problems. And just in order to be sure we didn't miss anything, we might also consider the move bishop to other squares. In the actual game, by the way, I've just failed to consider the move bishop h6 at all. I actually didn't see it because I did see the move, but I just didn't consider it because I didn't believe it could work. But that's actually the only move which wins a tempo for white when moving the bishop, because if the bishop just moves to f4, for example, which is the move I played in the game, then it's a non-forcing move. Black has time to react. Now black had time to move his rook into the center, and I did have a check on d5, but now that the bishop on d7 is protected by the rook also, the black king could just move to f7, and this is much less promising than it was with the bishop coming to h6. And even though I still managed to win the game later on, I was actually very much disappointed for not seeing the move bishop h6, which have won the game immediately. And basically, the move bishop h6 should have been considered once again in one of the first move I should have considered, because it's a very forcing move, which only leaves black one serious option, which is to take the bishop. Then I get a tempo to play knight d5, and as we've seen in the calculations, it works concretely, and white is getting just a winning position. He only needs to be precise in the actual calculation, of course. And this is a theme for other videos. So I hope you enjoyed this short video about efficient calculation, and I will see you next time. Bye bye, guys.